Mark Riley there. And Mark tells us Prime Minister Rudd had a 30-minute crisis call with Chinese President Wen Jiabao last week. Now, the PM wanted to know whether China will keep buying Australian resources. He got a mixed response. China expects a slowdown, but it'll still be growing at 9%. Let's go back to Richard Quest in London at CNN. Richard, will China save the day for Australia? It is being seen as our big security blanket.
It may not be a big, comfortable feather duvet that it was a few years ago of a security blanket. It may be a bit threadbare, but it's certainly going to be a very comfortable place for you to fall upon. It's your get-out-of-jail-free card, if you like, Koshi, in this crisis, because 9% economic growth by China to support its own domestic demand. China may not be exporting as much to the United States and to the European Union, but its domestic demand is still strong. They're still going to be growing. And yes, from that point of view, I do agree. China is very comfortably the bit at which you're going to fall back upon. OK. All right, Richard, stay with us. Now, I want to bring in Andrew Banks now to talk about jobs. Andrew founded recruitment giant Morgan & Banks and Talent 2. More importantly, he's been through lots of economic downturns. Andrew, we've just heard that maybe unemployment going to 7 or 8%. What are the most vulnerable jobs?
Well, I guess jobs that aren't skilled and or semi-skilled. But I think the good news about Australia is generally when we lose work, it's across a broad range. So we don't have sort of industries that are, have a large percentage of our workforce that it's concentrated on. So it tends to be fairly evenly spread.
OK.
Interestingly, only about 65% of Australians have a permanent job. So we have a lot of permanent, part-time, flexible work. And I agree with some of the earlier commentators that I think this will help us. But the thing that makes me a bit more optimistic than some of the others is that this is unlike the 90s when we had the dark days of double-digit unemployment. We have all the world's engines of growth. We didn't have the Eastern European countries, India and China, working in the 90s. That's pretty new.
Okay.
We've got record lows of unemployment. But also, interestingly, Koshi, because we've been short of people for the last 4 or 5 years, capacity constraints, as we would say, but in plain English, we haven't had enough people. Companies have been quite lean.
Okay.
And so it's not like we've got fat, dumb and happy companies that have had too many people.
What if you're in the local branch of a big international company that's doing it tough overseas and is saying, right, we're going to cut staff across the board, or you work for a small to medium-sized business where the boss is doing it tough now, it's going to get even tougher. Should you start reskilling? Should you start looking around?
Well, I think the important thing is don't jump to conclusions, as the Prime Minister says, just because there's some bad news coming in on a wire from overseas. The problem with the world today is there's about 1.8 billion of us in a chat room and we all talk ourselves into things. So if you're concerned about your job or your company, go and have a chat to someone, your boss or people, and say, how's it going? I think the message to CEOs of companies is communicate, 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 talk about what's going on.
Yep.
But generally speaking, I don't think people should overreact. Because otherwise they could create a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure. All right, Andrew, thanks for your time. It was property that started all of this, home loans handed out to Americans whether they could afford them or not. House prices in the US have collapsed. Some homes are selling for as little as $1. Europe is now going through the same thing. So what's going to happen here? Howard Gretton investigates.
In the US, thriving communities are now suburban wastelands. The banks have repossessed 3 million homes. House prices in the US and the UK have plummeted 20 to 30%. What about here, the so-called lucky country, where buying a house is the great Australian dream? Are we immune? What's going to happen to home ownership and affordability in the future?
Well, it's going to return to the 60s, I think. It'll be a time for savings and you're going to have to eyeball the bank manager again.
Real estate agent Paul Tonich was a top seller in the boom, in the state that boomed the most, Western Australia. How times have changed.
We've had chocolates. We actually forgot what bald lollies are. Like, we haven't met this market before.
In the newer suburbs, families with big mortgages are doing everything they can to hold on.
At the moment, I'm working 3 jobs to try and keep my house, basically, and my wife's having to work nearly 7 days a week. So there's no one to look after the kids.
Gareth Grasso is worried his home is not worth what he paid for it 2 years ago at the height of the boom.
That's $645 now. That's $645. Exemplary living here.
Slow going at a Sydney auction.
The market still, is speaking, and again today we're a little bit shy of where we wanted to be or where we expected to be. However, our vendor had a decision to sell, and he did.
Hi, how are you? I'm Julie. Here's a brochure on the property.
Agents say for those lucky enough to have the money, it's a buyer's market.
There seems to be things in our favour that properties have been on the market for quite a long time now.
I think cash will be king. If you've got the money to invest, you're going to do particularly well over the next few months and years.
465, sold to the gentleman right there. Congratulations, sir.
Howard Gretton there. Let's bring in Louis Christopher. Louis, you make your living analysing the property market. Are we headed for a property slump the size of what's happening in America and Europe?
I think it's actually possible. When we actually look at our debt-to-income ratios, they're actually higher than what the States went through. So we've got a huge household debt that we have to deal with at this point in time. And if the world economy goes into a deleveraging environment, in other words, assets are sold down, then yes, we could be in trouble.
Which areas of Australia are most at risk?
I believe the WA housing market is certainly at most at risk. That together with the southeast Queensland market. Yes, we've got their Sydney richest suburbs. We're already seeing that now. Auction clearance rates at the top end are coming off. That together with Melbourne as well. And yes, we do have Darwin in there because they were part of the commodities boom.
Any areas that will hold up better than others, do you reckon?
Well, it all depends how far the economy is damaged with the events. Look, if we see massive damage, then everyone's going to be impacted. It's no matter what. However, if it's a mild downturn, then I actually believe the Sydney market, many parts of the Sydney market will hold. But outside that, and maybe we could consider Melbourne, but outside that, no, there'll be some damage.
What if you need to sell at the moment?
Well, if you're an outright homeowner, let's say you don't have any mortgage, don't sell. There's no need to sell.
Okay.
Hang on to the house, just don't look at the value of it. If you have debt on your house, I would recommend paying it off as quickly as you can. If you have to sell, then sell quickly.
All right. Okay, Louis, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Now, before we go tonight, things may appear a bit scary at the moment, but Australia is the best country in the world to fight this crisis. If necessary, the Reserve Bank still has a long way to go in cutting interest rates. The federal government has plenty of cash to stimulate the economy. That doesn't mean it's going to be rosy. It's not a time to take big risks. Look carefully at your job situation and pay off debt. What's really needed right now is for the world's leaders to show a bit of leadership and stop the panic. Richard Quest in London, what do they need to do, these world leaders, to settle us down?
We need serious people to take serious decisions over this serious crisis. It's been running for the best part of 12 months, Koshi, and the unpalatable truth is that political leaders have not wanted to face up to how horrendous this systemic collapse really is. Well, guess what, guys? It's on top of you, it's collapsing around you, and you are the ones that have to build it up. And that is why we have started to see late, as the Americans say, a day late and a dollar short, but finally, we're seeing coordinated action.
Okay.
Whether it's too late, only you and I will be able to talk about in about 12 months.
All right, Richard Quest, we'll keep checking back in with you. Thanks for your time tonight. Thank you for watching this 7 News special. Of course, we'll keep minding your money through 7 News today, tonight and Sunrise each and every day. Good night.